Alright, rookie, do you really think you're cut out for being part of the FBI? Well, we'll sure see about that. We're not chasing pickpockets and purse snatchers here. We're dealing with mass murder, terrorism, larceny, arson, and plenty that's worse than even those. We're up to our elbows in threats to national security, and you still think you got what it takes? Then let's put that to the test, shall we? Why don't we head on down to the archive and pull up the files for 13 of our most wanted, just to give you a flavor of some of the most dangerous criminals who have ever been put away in the history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and even some of the ones who are still at large. Get to it, rookie. Let's start at the very beginning. Thomas James Holden, the first man to make it onto the FBI's most wanted list back in 1950. That's when the most wanted list became one of the tools used by the Bureau to seek help from the public when tracking down wanted fugitives. In the last 70 years, more than 500 names have been added or removed when necessary. But Holden was the one who started it all. His life of crime started long before he made the most wanted fugitives list, though. From 1926 onward, he formed one half of the Holden Keating gang alongside his literal partner in crime, Francis Keating, as the pair conducted a mass robbery spree across the American Midwest in the 20s and 30s. And they certainly weren't simply pinching the loose change out of people's pockets. Their preferred targets were trucks delivering payroll to businesses, as well as banks and even trains. Holden and Keating made off like the bandits they were, with hundreds of thousands of dollars before the pair were caught and arrested in 1928, each sentenced to 25 years in prison. However, things were far from over for Thomas James Holden. Within 2 years of their sentence, both he and Keating were able to escape from Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas after smuggling guns and ammunition inside, aiding the escape of 7 other inmates. And he still wasn't done. He formed another gang, was arrested once more, and served the remainder of his original sentence alongside notorious gangster Al Capone in Alcatraz. While on parole, Holden shot and killed his wife Lillian in 1949 after beating her, as well as opening fire on 2 men who came to her aid. Eventually, and in proof that their most wanted list worked, the FBI was able to get Holden sent to prison for life in 1951, dying behind bars 2 years later. But first, we have a question for you. Have you ever done a Google search on your own name? Were you surprised by just how many results there were? And how many had your real address, phone number, and even things like health records available for literally anyone to find? I couldn't believe how much of my personal data was available, and it really frightened me. And that's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests. And removing that information not only has reduced the amount of spam calls and emails I get, it also protects me from hackers who could use it to access my accounts, everything from social media to online banks. But it's not just sketchy companies that you have to worry about. AT&T recently revealed that over 73 million existing and former customers had their information leaked onto the dark web. In response, they recommended everyone use stronger passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. But I didn't have to, because Aura already does all this for me. And best of all, I didn't have to download a bunch of different apps just because a company couldn't keep my data secure. Even if my info was compromised, I don't have to worry because Aura is always on and always doing the hard work to keep me safe. I value my privacy, and I value yours. So go to aura.com/infographics or use the link in the description to start your 2-week free trial. Thanks to Aura. And now back to the video. You think an infamous thief and murderer from decades back would have been an easy caller if you were there, rookie? You sure think highly of your skills, don't you? How about one of the FBI's most wanted from this side of the turn of the millennium, huh? Meet Robert William Fisher, a Navy veteran and later a firefighter, surgical catheter technician, and a respiratory therapist. He had a wife, Mary, and 2 children, a son of 10 and a daughter of 12 years old. And despite his attempts to maintain an image of being a devoted family man, Fisher was described as a distant control freak of a father. On the morning of the 10th of April 2001, the Fisher's house in Scottsdale, Arizona, was ripped apart by an explosion, one that Robert Fisher himself caused. Police discovered that Mary and her 2 children had been killed before the explosion. Fisher had shot his wife in the back of her head and horrifically slashed the throats of both his own son and daughter from ear to ear. Then he attempted to conceal the evidence of this triple homicide by pulling out a gas line behind the furnace in the Fisher home. When the pilot light on the house's water heater had come on, the accumulated gas ignited, with the resultant explosion being strong enough to rattle the frames of the houses in all directions within a half-mile from the Fishers' residence. The fire that followed burned down the house into a pile of charred rubble, and the firefighters discovered the bodies of Mary and her 2 young children lying in a bed in what little was left of the house. At the time of the murders, Robert Fisher disappeared. In the weeks before her death, Mary Fisher had expressed her intention to divorce Robert to her friends, owing to the marital difficulties between the two. Robert was psychologically impacted by his parents' own divorce when he was a child. He felt threatened by this, and it resulted in him ending the lives of his family before they could leave him. Oh, what's that, rookie? Do you want to know how the Bureau apprehended him? Well, guess what? Since June of 2002, Fisher was added to the FBI's most wanted list, and as of 2024, he remains at large. Oh, do you think we found everyone on the list? Well, think again. Some of the worst criminals guilty of the most heinous crimes are still out there. You might have a roommate you don't always see eye to eye with. Maybe they play their music a little too loud, or they snore while you're trying to sleep. But this next entry will make you glad for your roommate's shortcomings. Meet Gary Ray Bowles, otherwise known as the I-95 Killer, a man who would be hell to live with. Don't believe us? Well, ask John Roberts, the man who offered Bowles a temporary place to live, only to be beaten and strangled to death in April 1994 after the two of them had an argument. Bowles then stole John's credit card and over the next 6 months enacted a spate of further killings. His preferred method of operation was undoubtedly sickening, as Bowles would frequent numerous gay bars where he pretended to take an interest in other patrons to get them alone, then murdered them in cold blood in much the same way he'd done to his now former roommate. By stealing their credit cards and allowing the men to solicit favors from him, Bowles stayed on the move and evaded authorities for months, staying with various other roommates temporarily. He became known as the I-95 Killer, given that most of his victims lived near the Interstate 95 highway, which runs along the east coast of the U.S. Eventually, on the 22nd of October 1994, Bowles' name ended up landing on the FBI's most wanted list, given that he was considered a person of interest in multiple murders at this point. The added publicity led to several calls to the authorities by former housemates, some of whom were lucky enough to be spared the same treatment as John Roberts. A week after being added to the most wanted list, Gary Bowles, the I-95 Killer, was arrested after killing yet another roommate. During questioning, he broke down and confessed to 6 murders in total. He would be found guilty on 3 of the 6 counts of his homophobic killings and was ultimately sentenced to death in the state of Florida in September 1999, with his eventual execution being carried out 23 years later. We've heard about some downright evil men whose actions have wound them up on the FBI's most wanted list. But what about the ladies? Well, throughout the list's history and out of the hundreds of names included on there, only 10 of them have ever been women. The very first woman to appear on the list, added back in 1968, was Ruth Eisenman Shire, thanks to a particularly cruel crime she carried out alongside her accomplice and boyfriend, Gary Stephen Christ. Together with Christ, who had recently escaped from prison, they disguised themselves as police officers and arrived at the door of a room at the Roadway Inn in Decatur, Georgia, where Barbara Mackle and her mother were staying. Barbara was the daughter of Robert Mackle, a wealthy land developer in Florida, and both Eisenman Shire and Christ knew it. The duo got inside the room thanks to their disguises and claimed that one of Barbara's friends had been in a traffic accident. Once inside, they chloroformed Barbara's mother, then forced the 20-year-old girl into the back of their car that they had waiting outside. You would think that kidnapping an innocent girl would be as bad as it got, but Ruth Eisenman Shire and her partner didn't stop there. They forcibly buried Barbara alive in a shallow trench, keeping her inside a fiberglass reinforced box, which was fitted with a lamp, an air pump, food, water that was laced with sedatives, and 2 plastic pipes leading inside to supply Barbara with air. You see, Ruth Eisenman Shire had no interest in killing Barbara Mackle. The plan was to ransom her. They demanded a $500,000 payment from Barbara's father, the equivalent of just over $4 million as of 2023. The ransom was paid, and true to their word, they called the FBI with instructions on where to find Barbara. The pair were ultimately caught after the FBI located their victim after she spent over 300 days buried underground. After being placed on the FBI's most wanted list, Ruth Eisenman Shire was arrested in 1969 when she submitted her fingerprints while applying for a job at an Oklahoma hospital. After the ransom money had been dropped off, she and Christ parted ways, seemingly not on good terms. She was convicted and sentenced to 7 years in prison, then given parole after serving 4, at which point she was deported back to her home country of Honduras. From people who ended up on the most wanted list after one big crime, to someone who had his hands in several throughout a storied criminal career. Next up is one of the most notorious mob bosses ever to live. And not the one you're probably thinking of. Decades after the reign of Al Capone, another mobster rose to prominence as the boss of the Irish mob in Boston, from the 70s through to the 90s. James Joseph Bolger, otherwise known as Whitey. And his long tenure and success in organized crime was helped in large part thanks to the protection provided to Whitey by the FBI themselves. Bolger's life of crime started early, joining street gangs at a young age, then finding himself in and out of jail for various assault and theft charges. Then in 1956, after being convicted of hijacking, he landed in federal prisons, serving time in multiple penitentiaries, including the infamous Alcatraz prison. While in federal custody, Whitey even volunteered for experiments conducted by the CIA, wherein they dosed prison inmates with LSD and other drugs in exchange for lessened sentences. Yeah, this guy had something of a fascinatingly eventful life. Leaving prison in 1965, Bolger joined up with the Irish-American Killeen gang in Boston, during a time when rival factions were at war. As part of this war, Whitey would commit his first homicide, killing the twin brother of a rival gangster, mistaking him for his actual target. Throughout his criminal career, he'd become known for his readiness to use violence to achieve his goals, particularly murder. When the boss and the deputy of the Winter Hill Gang were arrested in 1979, Bolger quickly assumed control. But despite having his hands in all manner of criminal endeavors, including racketeering, money laundering, fixing horse races, extortion, and even more murders, Whitey had been working as an informant for the FBI as early as 1974, without the knowledge of his fellow gang members. He worked closely with an FBI agent he'd grown up alongside and had been to school with, as well as another informant within the gang. The information supplied by Whitey pertained to the obsessive pursuit of Italian-American crime families that were on and off allies and occasional rivals to the Irish-American mob. Eventually, made aware that his arrest was coming, Whitey gave up his double life in 1994 and went on the run from the Bureau, avoiding being arrested on suspicion of 19 murders and nearly 30 other federal charges. He remained on the most wanted list until he was eventually tracked down in 2011. Then, 2 years later, found himself slapped with 2 life sentences when he was found guilty of 31 of the charges he was up against. In 2018, Whitey Bolger was murdered in prison, with the FBI resolving to investigate just how another inmate gained access to his cell. Of all the people whose names have ever graced the FBI's most wanted list, not many can boast the achievement of making it on the list twice. The first man to do so was none other than James Earl Ray, the man who assassinated civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. Beforehand, Ray had been little more than a small-time crook, known for robbing gas stations and liquor stores. He'd done some time in prison, once in Illinois and twice in Missouri, and on the 23rd of April 1967, he'd actually managed to escape from Missouri State Penitentiary. Just short of a year later, on the 4th of April 1968, Ray shot Martin Luther King Jr., who had been standing on the balcony of a motel room in Memphis, Tennessee. In fact, immediately after the assassination, James Earl Ray was identified as the prime suspect. Wow, they certainly figured that out conveniently quickly. How or why did a small-time criminal be able to break out of prison and within a year assassinate one of the most prominent African-American civil rights leaders in the United States? Draw your own conclusions. It's not entirely impossible that he had backing from a particular federal agency. But we don't like that kind of rampant speculation here at the FBI. Keep it to yourself, rookie. Fleeing to Toronto, Ray managed to secure himself a Canadian passport and headed to London, then Lisbon, and then back to London. However, his strange travel plans were cut short when a customs officer at Heathrow Airport recognized the alias he was using from a Canadian wanted list. Taken back to Memphis, Ray pleaded guilty to the assassination of MLK, foregoing a trial and being sentenced to 99 years in prison. Months later, he recanted his confession, but it did little to change his circumstances. Then, in June 1977, James Earl Ray would find himself back on the FBI's most wanted list when he managed to escape from Brushy Mountain Prison in Tennessee. For 54 hours, a massive manhunt was conducted to track the alleged assassin down, resulting in Ray being recaptured. However, in the years that followed, he would renounce his guilt, raising questions about a potential conspiracy surrounding MLK's death. While Ray was never able to present evidence proving his claims, his pleas to actually have a trial were supported by MLK's own family, who have long contested that the FBI themselves had a direct hand in King's assassination. From a man whose guilt is still uncertain to one who was undeniably guilty and whose heinous crimes rightfully earned him a spot on the FBI's most wanted list, Ted Bundy's name lives in so much infamy that this sadistic serial killer needs little to no introduction. One of the most, if not arguably the most, notorious serial killers in American history, Ted Bundy might have seemed outwardly charming and personable, but beneath that demeanor he was a depraved and violent monster. With a history of spying on unsuspecting women that earned him a juvenile record, Bundy graduated college in 1972, seemingly headed toward a career in law or politics. But his extracurricular activities were where his true passion was, assaulting his earliest known victim in 1974. His preferred targets were young, college-aged women, often keeping his arm in a sling, wearing a fake cast or walking on crutches to elicit sympathy, and using his charm to convince his victims to assist him with tasks that drew them near his car. Using a pipe, Bundy would then knock them unconscious, handcuff them, and take them away to do truly unspeakable things to them, a lot of which we cannot go into detail on. He would typically strangle or bludgeon these women, then mutilate their bodies after killing them. Bundy was also fond of bringing his victims' deceased bodies into his home, at times displaying their severed heads around the apartment, like disturbing trophies. He also shared a bed with some of the decaying corpses of his victims until the decomposition of the bodies made it unbearable. For a while, he was able to evade suspicion. Bundy was eventually arrested, but managed to escape from custody multiple times, the second of which landed him on the FBI's most wanted list. In December of 1977, during his second escape, Bundy embarked on a continuation of his killing spree, assaulting and killing at least 6 more people before he was caught for a traffic violation. Overall, Ted Bundy confessed to taking the lives of 30 people, although the exact number remains unknown to this day. He was sentenced to death and executed via the electric chair on the 24th of January, 1989. Of course, Bundy is far from the only infamous name to end up on the FBI's most wanted list. There's another that used to be at the very top whose actions have led to even more deaths than the notorious serial killer. Osama bin Laden, the founder of Al-Qaeda and the man behind the 9/11 terror attack on the World Trade Center. Except, while it was his devastating acts of terror that made him infamous the world over, bin Laden had been a target of the FBI for well over a decade before 2001, and was even present on their most wanted list as early as 1993. You see, bin Laden wasn't just responsible for one major act of terror, but had his hand in several ever since he formed Al-Qaeda in 1988, just before the end of the Soviet war in Afghanistan against CIA-backed Mujahideen fighters who would later go on to form the foundational members of the Taliban, another terrorist organization. Bin Laden racked up quite a resume of terror attacks in his war against the West, particularly America. Specifically, the 1993 Mogadishu bombing, in which Somali rebels trained by bin Laden and his compatriots killed 18 American servicemen. That same year, bin Laden was also tied to the first attack on the World Trade Center, which killed 6 people and injured over 1,000. These were what landed him on the FBI's most wanted list, but bin Laden was far from being done. In 1995, he attempted to have Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak assassinated and killed. In 1996, he bombed a U.S. Air Force complex in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Then, in 1998, over 200 died as a result of twin bombings at U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, which Al-Qaeda took credit for. Then, of course, in 2001, the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center made Osama bin Laden the most wanted man in the world, earning him the title of public enemy number 1. The FBI even put a staggering $25 million bounty on his head. Even so, bin Laden was able to evade being captured or killed, spending the remainder of his life in hiding. That was until the 1st of May 2011 when U.S. SEAL Team 6 stormed his compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan and shot him. Osama bin Laden had spent almost 2 decades as one of the most feared men in the world and was likely responsible for more deaths than anyone else on the FBI's most wanted list. How do you like those bad apples, rookie? Still think you're cut out for a life in the Bureau? Oh, I get it. You think you'll have nothing to worry about because most of these infamous faces either ended up behind bars or 6 feet beneath the ground. Hold on, you said you think that by comparison things will be a cakewalk? Oh, you've done it now. We'll see how much of a cakewalk you think this is. Grab that file right there and hand it over. It's time for you to meet some of the people still on the FBI's most wanted list and still at large right now. Alexis Flores, born in Honduras in 1975, sustained a neck injury during Hurricane Mitch in 1998 leaving him with a noticeable surgical scar. Several years later, in late July 2000, a 5-year-old girl named Iriana de Jesus went missing in Philadelphia. Around the time of her disappearance, a homeless drifter from Honduras, known locally only as Carlos, arrived in the area. Jorge Contreras, a Hunting Park, Philadelphia resident, provided shelter and clothing to Carlos in exchange for his services as a general handyman. On August 3, 2000, only 5 days after being reported missing, the body of 5-year-old Iriana de Jesus was found in the basement of an empty apartment building. She had been violently assaulted, strangled, and then left wrapped up in a trash bag. Also left behind on the scene was a t-shirt covered in Iriana's blood, which Jorge Contreras recognized thanks to the distinct political logo on it. The shirt was one of the articles of clothing he'd given to Carlos. And the building where Iriana's body was found was a place where the man was thought to have often stayed. All the evidence seemed to implicate Carlos in this heinous crime involving a minor. But in reality, there was no Carlos. Police investigators would soon suspect that Carlos was Alexis Flores. In 2007, this would be confirmed when DNA taken from the Philadelphia crime scene thought to belong to Carlos was matched with that of Flores. However, Alexis Flores had already been arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, back in 2004 on a charge of forgery, leading to his deportation back to Honduras. Since 2007, he's remained at large and named in the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives, with the reward for any information leading to his capture increasing from $100,000 to $250,000 in 2023. As of 2024, though, Alexis Flores has yet to face justice for his crime. $250,000 seems like quite a sweet reward for anyone who spots Alexis Flores. But you know what's nicer than $250,000, rookie? How about $5 million? That's the amount the FBI is currently offering for anyone with information on Wilver Villegas Palomino, a man thought to have been involved in a 20-year-long conspiracy to distribute illegal substances from Colombia to the United States. According to the FBI, Villegas Palomino is a high-ranking member of the National Liberation Army, a Colombian insurgency group involved in the ongoing conflict that has swept the country since 1964. The group is classified as a terrorist organization by the governments of the United States, Colombia, Canada, New Zealand, and the European Union. Villegas Palomino is charged with the crime of narco-terrorism due to his role in helping traffic cocaine into the U.S., and given that this criminal activity and the selling of the illegal drug has helped to fund a terrorist organization. According to federal officials, most of the funds obtained by the ELN through drug trafficking is used to help fund terrorist attacks, as well as help them buy political influence and other actions that they conduct in an attempt to destabilize the Colombian government. Given that Villegas Palomino is accused of trafficking drugs through Houston, he's become another new fixture on the FBI's most wanted fugitives list since April 14, 2023. However, he was first indicted in February 2020 by the Southern District of Texas on charges of not only narco-terrorism, but also conspiracy to import cocaine and the international distribution of it. Following the ruling, a federal arrest warrant was issued for Villegas Palomino, but his whereabouts remain unknown. He reportedly often operates under aliases, including Wilver Villegas or Wilver Palomino, or our personal favorite, Carlos El Puerco, which translates to Carlos the Hog. With still no further clues as to where he might be hiding, the FBI has attempted to encourage anyone with information on Wilver Villegas Palomino's whereabouts to come forward, and as of September 2020, are offering a staggering $5 million for any information that leads to his capture. $5 million is certainly a hefty payday, probably more than you'll see as a rookie FBI special agent, but it pales in comparison to the literal billions stolen in a Ponzi scheme by the missing crypto queen herself. I hope you're paying attention, rookie. Remember when I mentioned there had only ever been 10 women on the FBI's most wanted list? Well, here's one still out there, Ruya Ignatova. In 2014, Ignatova introduced the world to OneCoin, her proposed rival to the original longest-lasting and most well-known cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. Back in 2016, interest in cryptocurrency was at an all-time high, with investors in an excited frenzy throwing heaps of money at what they saw as a new opportunity to be even more greedy. Make even more money. Garnering attention with OneCoin, Ignatova pitched it as a Bitcoin killer that would become big enough to overshadow the rival cryptocurrency completely. But in reality, OneCoin was a highly fraudulent Ponzi scheme. Early investors were being paid with the money being funneled into OneCoin by newer investors, It was also considered a pyramid scheme since more and more investors were being roped in with no proof of the product's existence. And all the while, Ruya Ignatova was pocketing plenty of that sweet investor capital. OneCoin stole approximately the equivalent of $4 billion since its launch in 2014 from investors all across the globe. Naturally, this landed Ignatova and the rest of the leaders of OneCoin in scalding hot water, with most of them being apprehended by the authorities. Her brother Konstantin Ignatova pled guilty to committing fraud and money laundering charges relating to the OneCoin scheme. But Ruya Ignatova has still managed to avoid facing any justice, thanks to someone tipping her off that the police were taking an interest in looking into OneCoin. Back in 2017, she was able to disappear. Since then, she's been charged in absence with all kinds of fraud imaginable and found her name on the FBI's most wanted list as of June 2022. For a brief time, there were rumors that Ignatova had been murdered aboard a yacht in the Ionian Sea at the behest of a Bulgarian drug lord back in November 2018. This was allegedly to conceal the drug lord's involvement in OneCoin and resulted in Ignatova's body being dismembered and thrown overboard. However, as of 2022, the FBI believes she is still alive. More recently, it seemed like Ignatova had resurfaced in 2023 when a luxury London penthouse she bought, yes, with funds from her fake cryptocurrency, went up for sale. Some suggested that Ruya Ignatova could have been orchestrating the sale of the £12.5 million four-bedroom penthouse that she had filled with expensive artwork and designer clothes before she was forced to go into hiding. However, her name only continued to be associated with the property thanks to UK transparency laws, which meant that she had to be named as the previous owner. Sadly, for anyone who lost their money in Ignatova's crypto scam, the reward for any information on her whereabouts is only $250,000. Chump change compared to the amount she made by duping investors. Eat your heart out, Razzle Khan. From a crypto scammer to a North Carolina killer, another name on the FBI's most wanted list with a hefty $250,000 price on his head is Alejandro Rosales Castillo. This 25-year-old fugitive might be the best argument for never dating your co-workers after he took the life of a former girlfriend when he was only 17. Back in 2016, Castillo worked in a Show Mars restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina, alongside Truc Quan Lai Li, known to her friends as Sandy. The pair of them dated for a short while, during which time Castillo borrowed some money from Sandy, which he never paid back after the two of them split. Now with a new girlfriend, Amia Feaster, Castillo texts Sandy in August of 2016 telling her he wants to repay the money she loaned him. The two meet up, with Feaster bringing Castillo to the place they'd agreed. But instead of repaying Sandy, it's believed that Castillo forced her, possibly at gunpoint, to withdraw all the money from her bank account at an ATM, which totaled to the last $1,000 she had left. Afterward, Castillo was thought to have driven Sandy to a wooded area and shot her in the head, leaving her body in a ravine before stealing her car alongside Amia Feaster. Castillo and Feaster drove to Phoenix, Arizona, and eventually crossed the border into Mexico. However, in October that same year, Feaster reached out to her mother and was extradited to the US and then arrested. According to her, Castillo had just vanished one day, even though she had no idea where he went. Investigators believe Castillo could still be in Mexico somewhere and could even be in continued contact with friends or family back in the US. As I said, dating your coworkers rarely works out. Are you married, Rook? I only ask because if you learned anything in this line of work, it's that marriage can be more trouble than it's worth. Sure, you might end up moderately happy for the rest of your life, maybe even with someone you like. But that's just the best case scenario we're talking about here. Worst case, well, you might not even get to enjoy the honeymoon period. On the 11th of May 2012, Estrella Carrera married Arnaldo Jimenez at Chicago City Hall. After sharing a celebratory dinner with family and friends, the couple set off to dance the night away at a club, eventually leaving around 4 o'clock. Then on the way back, things got heated, and not in the way they usually do on a wedding night. The newlyweds got themselves into an argument which resulted in Jimenez fatally stabbing his new wife multiple times in his car. He then dragged her body into the apartment and left her dumped in the bathtub to bleed out, still wearing the silver dress she had worn when the two of them had been married mere hours earlier, less than a full day after the wedding. Estrella had been the mother of 2 children, a 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, and a 2-year-old son she'd had with Jimenez. When she didn't arrive to pick the children up from her family the next day, something was clearly wrong. She was reported missing to the police and her body was discovered the following day, May 13, 2012. There had been no sign of forced entry, and Jimenez was nowhere to be found. 3 days later, he was charged with first-degree murder, and both a state and federal warrant for his arrest followed not long after. But despite his car being found on his brother's property in September 2012, with Estrella Carrera's blood inside, nobody has seen or heard from Arnaldo Jimenez since the murder took place. The FBI believes he might be hiding out in Mexico, suspecting that his brother drove him there in his car and left him there. Just like many others who are still at large, the FBI increased their initial reward for any information leading to Jimenez's arrest from $100,000 to $250,000, and yet still his whereabouts and the whereabouts of the numerous other names on the most wanted list currently remain unknown. Now check out 50 insane declassified FBI secrets you didn't know, or watch this video instead.